Hello, my name is Glen Scrivener. I'm coming to you from our Eastbourne studios here at Speak Life. And over in Crowborough, we have Joe Exotic himself, the Tiger King. Say hello to the people.
Hello, everybody. Yes. And I like to think it makes me look rather refined, and quite masculine in many ways.
No, it makes you look like Joe Exotic.
Easy ladies,
I'm quite expecting a tiger to be, wrapping itself around your shoulders at some point in the recording. Or the other person you remind me of is Ben Stiller's character in Dodgeball for some reason.
Yeah. So. Hey, if you can dodge a wrench, dodge a dodgeball.
Terrific. And you are doing this for charity, just so that people.
This is I am doing it for the Movember thing. To raise awareness of men's health. I mean, if this isn't a cry for help, I don't know what is. But So men's mental health, and also kind of just men's health more generally, because we know that guys are generally not great at talking about things, and also or going to the doctor when they're ill. So
yes.
It's just a little thing.
I like it, and it's also another reason that you guys need to subscribe to us on our YouTube channel and tap that bell, because if you're just listening to this on the podcast, let me tell you, you are really missing out. Because it's not natural. It's just not natural. Well, in fact, it is natural, isn't it? This is what happens when you don't shave.
Exactly.
So what do we even mean by things being natural? That is the topic for today. And we're talking about it for a number of different reasons. We've got three different areas that we want to discuss with you. And they all have something to do with what is it that we think of as natural, and whether we should try to be natural, or whether we should try to exert ourselves over nature. And, so the very first area where we're going to talk is the area of environmentalism. And I wonder, like, Paul, what do you think as we think of trying to be good environmentalists, trying to be good stewards of creation, what do you have to assume about the world and about humanity in order to be a good environmentalist, do you think?
I guess, there's an assumption there, isn't there, that we are, as human beings, in some way to be caretakers and, to be stewards of the world. And that's quite unusual, isn't it, if you had a purely kind of naturalistic worldview, to think that we as a particular species out of, thousands, have some kind of responsibility to manage the whole project for the sake of all the others. We don't see other animal groups doing this for the sake of, mankind or, other species. So I guess that it's that kind of thing, isn't it? That's the kind of assumptions you've got underlying it.
Yes. Save the Whale is a human enterprise. It's not led by the whales themselves. They're not interested in Save the Krill. Quite the opposite.
No.
So what is the position of humanity in the world, such that humanity takes responsibility for its crimes against nature, because we do commit crimes against nature, and how do we take responsibility for our place in nature? And one of the things that made me think about this was listening to Radio 4 this morning, the Today program, and they interviewed a guy, Tim Smith, of the Eden Project, and he was talking about a new GCSE that they're going to add into the mix, probably in the year 2022, but they're going to study natural history. And I thought it was very interesting. We're going to hear a clip in a second about Tim Smith talking about why we should study natural history. And it's all about getting back in touch with nature. And most people, they don't know how to identify a beech leaf as opposed to an oak leaf. And like most kids don't know how to identify things like poison ivy and things and things that might actually do them harm in nature. And so wouldn't it be good to have a natural history subject that you can study together and find out about the natural world? So here's a clip of Tim Smith talking about it. And then actually the presenter on Radio 4 asks some very interesting questions about where humanity fits into Tim Smith's vision of nature. Let's have a look.
With observation, don't they?
When it comes to the hard science, what, for instance, would it tell children about genetic modification?
I'm not sure that that is where you would learn about genetic modification. I would think genetic modification and CRISPR technology and that sort of thing might well crop up in biology, but what it what it would probably discuss is the impact of genetic modification on diverse ecosystems, to make sure that one was thinking about adaptation or human adaptation in a really informed way that was sensitive to the natural world.
I suppose the reason I ask that is that Prince, one of the people behind this, as supporters of it, we are told, is Prince Charles. And Prince Charles also has quite controversial views, doesn't he, on nature and on our role and its role with us. I just wonder the extent to which this subject
Oh, am I on? I'm on. Oh, okay. I didn't know I was on. Hello, everybody. Yes, sorry.
If it's any consolation, it cuts straight back to me. So, like this.
Did it?
Just staring into space.
Looking very natural. Very natural. So the real issue there, I don't know how much of that clip you caught. We couldn't hear it either. But the real issue there is we have a place in nature. Do we just study nature at a distance, or how do we recognize our place within nature? Especially when we're thinking that humanity shapes nature and ought to shape nature. I don't know if you've realized this, but there's a pandemic on, and nature is biting back in all sorts of ways, and we're trying to figure out ways in which we can, I guess, through science, protect ourselves from nature and shape nature in various ways. And I guess that raising of the issue about vaccines makes us realize that we're in an interesting position as it comes to living in a dangerous world. Wouldn't you say, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Yeah, I mean, particularly when we think about this issue of vaccines, I guess, and we're in this moment, aren't we, where we're kind of all sitting on tenterhooks slightly and wondering what's going to happen. Is there going to be? I think was there an announcement today about a potential a different one from the one that we talked about?
There is another vaccine. Let me bring it up. It's where's this new vaccine? Here we go. A new vaccine that protects against Moderna. Yeah, with 95% effectiveness. So blowing Pfizer out of the water with its mere 90% effectiveness. Here is Moderna, a US company, coming up with a vaccine that can be stored at slightly higher temperatures. I think Pfizer had to be stored at kind of minus 60 degrees.
Minus 80, I think it was. Oh, yeah, from what I understand.
Whereas this one needs to be stored at minus 20, which is still pretty cold.
Yep.
It's colder than my fridge.
Yes.
But so we are able through technology to be able to navigate the various things that nature throws up at us. And we don't think that, let's just roll over because nature, let's just leave nature, the beauty of nature in the wild. We don't tend to think that. We don't tend to think nature should run its course.
And I suppose a vaccine, I was going to say in a sense, it's obvious really that it's not a natural thing, is it? To introduce a vaccine into something, it's an entirely unnatural creation that we're using to control nature in some way.
Yes, although it does mimic nature. So
yeah, absolutely, but it wouldn't have come about, would it? We wouldn't have it without kind of that, unless you. Depends, I suppose, whether you think just sitting around waiting for immunity is just the same thing. So.
Well, it's an artificial way of getting herd immunity, isn't it? It is a speeding up of that and an intentional artificial way of reaching herd immunity by injecting people with the virus's genetic code in order to provoke an immune response in people, which is what happens when you get the disease full blown. It's just clever old us. We've figured out a way of provoking the immune response without getting the full blown disease. And I think that's a good thing, right? But then, you do start to ask questions about the place of science within nature, because I think we can all think of kind of dystopian ways in which we might try to have dominion over the planet. We don't want to concrete over the whole world and just put up a parking lot.
I was going to say, we paved paradise. Little did she know it would actually do a lot to reduce congestion in the city centre.
Yeah.
So, it was a...
But she was right, wasn't she? You don't know what you got till it's gone.
Oh, so true. So true.
If lockdown has taught us that much. Yeah. But, you concrete over paradise. So who sang that song?
Joni Mitchell, was it?
Joni Mitchell, right.
Was it Joni
right.
Mitchell?
Yeah. So it's interesting, yeah, like concreting over paradise. Like we understand that's a very biblical concept, isn't it? Like we were made in paradise and we were given a garden. Now that speaks to me of something really interesting. That actually humanity is not set out into the wild. In fact, we're set in a garden, which is kind of halfway between a city and the wild. It's kind of managed nature. And the idea of a garden means actually being one with nature and working with the grain of nature and that sort of thing. But it also means applying your intelligence to artificially managing this environment. And I wonder whether, as well, Paul, we're in the Reset series. So we're thinking about the early chapters of Genesis 1, 2, and 3. And so I think the garden is one place we can go to try and think about what is our place in nature. But what else do you think Genesis 1 to 3 teaches us about humanity and nature?
More than just our place of stewardship and dominion?
Oh, well, there's that. So the Genesis 1, yeah.
Sorry, I thought you said okay. Yeah, I mean, I think we have this notion, don't we, as you said at the beginning, of being environmentalists or whatever. And I suppose Tom Holland, I'm sure, if he ever gets in on that side of it, he might say that, does that come from this idea that we have this Christian ethos, this worldview, that we are there to be stewards in some way?
Absolutely, yeah.
Like you said, not to subjugate creation, not to
dominate in a
dominate in a
tyrannical
bad
sense.
way, in a tyrannical sense, and just to take from nature, but actually, to work the land. That was part of it, isn't it? So I think that is the kind of, that is where we get this idea of these things from, probably.
Right, yeah. So Genesis 1, we have dominion. So it's interesting. We've got hierarchy within Genesis in which there's a God above us. There's humanity that is set over the world, and you kind of need that threefold layers, those three layers of thinking. That there's a law above us, and there's us above nature. And when you collapse those things, you get into all sorts of trouble. Because if everything is just nature, including us, then why on earth should we manipulate nature? And if we can manipulate nature, how is that any different to manipulating us? Yeah, which is a really scary thought. If human beings are just the natural result of natural processes, then there's neither God nor a humanity that is above nature. Everything is nature. And therefore, to even say that humans have a responsibility over nature is kind of to give ourselves that power. And if we take into our hands that power, then what's to say it should be the whole of humanity that is above nature? Why shouldn't it just be the strong? Doesn't nature teach you that the weak are cast off so that the strong can, propagate their genes?
Yeah.
And so it becomes a really dystopian vision, actually. And C.S. Lewis in The Abolition of Man starts talking about, if everything is nature, and if humanity is not above nature, and if there's no, he talks about the Tao, actually, in The Abolition of Man. If there's no sort of spiritual force, or if there's no God above us that's above nature, then what you what you have is not man managing nature. It's you've got man managing man and using science to do it. And it's quite chilling. He says, what we call man's power over nature turns out to be a power exercised by some men over other men, with nature as its instrument. Or similarly, he says, for the power of man to make himself what he pleases means the power of some men to make other men what they please. So that's a kind of a very dystopian vision, but I think there's good environmentalism and bad environmentalism. And I think there's a real danger of thinking that everything is nature and thinking that then you can be a good environmentalist. You even get within the green movement stuff that kind of questions the place of humanity. Like have you sensed some of that in terms of some of the advertising about how you can cut down on your carbon footprint, etc. It's not always the most pro-human message.
Well, no, and I think it just brings to my mind straight away the come and give us your unpopular opinions segment from Ricky Gervais. Humanity is a plague. It'd be better if we were all dead,
yes.
wiped out and that kind of thing. And there is a strain of, I think this comes up on I think it was Tom Holland again, talking
Ding.
with James. Yeah, exactly. Honk that horn. Talking with James Dellingpole on his podcast about this. He said there is a strain of environmentalism where on the fringes of it, it's not mainstream at all. There is an element of a group of people saying the best thing is just to get rid of all people, or less people, really. That's why it's strange, isn't it? In some ways, people have been saying, "Oh, you've got to stop breeding, stop having children. You shouldn't have more than this amount of children." Yada yada yada. And then, of course, only last year there was a thing that came out that said, all these nations are going to be like minus so many people by this stage in the future because the birth rate has plummeted, and all kinds of things like that. And actually, it doesn't seem like it's going to be massively positive. But so I think those people are fringe, aren't they? But where does that lead you if you really believe that the best thing? You just become Thanos, surely. Like you just think, because he had good motivations. He thought, just saying that. I got to the end of Infinity War, and I thought, this guy's not so bad.
He makes some
misunderstood
points.
Problem is, people just don't listen. Like they just see Thanos and they think Purple Man bad, and they don't listen to what he's saying. Right?
I'm a never Thanos man myself, but so just bring people up to speed with Thanos's kind of motto in life.
The theology of Thanos.
Yeah.
So Thanos' thing, wasn't it? I've only seen it once, in fairness. So his thing was that he would just randomly wipe out half of the entire universe's population, I think, wasn't it? Because he saw that planets couldn't sustain the people that were living on them. So, if you just get rid of 50% of the population, then actually stuff will be fine. And he wasn't discriminate about it. It was just a random 50%. He didn't say, like, people who look like this or are like that.
Yeah.
Just random click of the fingers. So, that was his thing.
Indiscriminate killing is so much better than and somehow he's the bad guy. But I don't think those voices are so fringe though within environmental movements. I mean, there are soft ways of putting it and hard ways of putting it, and obviously the most hard ways of putting it are kind of the anti-natalism movement that's just like humanity is a plague and it is your duty not to have children. But the soft version of it is, to reduce your carbon footprints, you could cancel all plane travel for the rest of your life, or you could just not have a kid. And that's the soft version of it, basically. And what do and if your carbon footprint is like the worst stain you can leave on the planet, and if you are equating your carbon footprint with having children, like you're kind of a soft anti-natalist, really. Having kids is a bad thing.
The stain you've left on the world.
Yeah, you're taking up too much space, and you're a waste of skin, or whatever. If everything is boiled down to that, then humanity is the problem. And at that stage, Genesis 3 pipes up, and Genesis 3 says, man gone wrong is the problem. That's true. Man gone wrong is the problem. But you read to the end of Genesis 3, and there is a man promised. The miraculous offspring of the woman will come and crush evil. So man is part of the solution. The man, Christ, is part of the solution, and humanity in him can be part of the solution. So, you do again have the raw ingredients for a good environmentalism in which we do take proper responsibility for our crimes against nature. And here's what's interesting. Like, once you identify that it's man's problem, all the problems that are going on in the world, you then start to realize that if you're going to be a good environmentalist, you need to deal with human beings and what human beings are like. And you can't just spend all your time saving whales. There's a fascinating quote by an environmentalist called Gus Spieth. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Gus Spieth. He's an American environmental lawyer and advocate. And this quote is fascinating. He says, "I used to think that top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought that 30 years of good science could address these problems. I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with these, we need a cultural and spiritual transformation." Isn't that interesting? And I guess you can produce as many David Attenborough award-winning documentaries as you like, but if you're not going to deal with these issues of selfishness, greed, and apathy, you're not going to move anyone to do anything.
No,
you need a doctrine of humanity.
Well, it's at the root of it. It's when people talk about things like going vegan, and people say, "Yeah, I just like steak too much." At the end of the day, I'd rather do, even if you could be sold, some people think that they would just education will be the thing, that if we just educate people, information goes in, we process the information, see the logic, and we come out the other side and it's all good. That's not, obviously we know that's not the case at all. We just want to do what we want to do, regardless of the effects. I mean, a sort of trivial example of that, I think it was John Mark Comer, talking about giving up coffee. That was just for his own, he just felt he was drinking so much coffee all the time. And he said, and it was great, I got over the initial thing and I was sleeping better and, I felt good and I saw all these amazing benefits for 6 months, and life was just so much better. And then I just to be honest, I just like coffee. So I just went back to it,
right.
Even though he could speak all these things where he was like, there were so many benefits to not doing this. But actually, I just like having the coffee. Right. I like having a steak. Right. I don't care about the methane going into the atmosphere or whatever it is.
Right. And then the response to that is quite a typical like fundamentalist religious response to that. Like from the hardcore environmentalist is, we need to crank up the fear to 11 at this point. And what people really don't get is that we've only got 12 years to save the planet, or the whole thing goes up in smoke.
We only got 11 years now, probably. So
we wasted the last 11 years on this, this pandemic. Forget that. Humanity is the plague. And so it has to become ever more apocalyptic again, because I think there's a faulty doctrine of humanity going on, and therefore, I think in the same way that Christians know you're saved utterly by grace becomes the motivation to be a better person in life, right? I think there's a parallel with the whole message about the creation and the new creation, right? Christians can come and say, the world is not going to hell in a handbasket. Everything is not going up in flames. The universe is not destined for heat death. The seas will not rise and cover us all. We have it on good authority that there will not be a flood like that, and that there is a future for planet Earth. So that takes the heat out of the whole thing, and it takes the hubris out of the whole thing, as though humanity in Adam is going to save the world. Mm-hmm. And you're kind of, we are assured, we have it on good authority that the earth has a future, an eternal future, God's future. But therefore, on the basis of that free gift, can we please steward this gift well? And notice I hope I'm doing the opposite of what some preachers have kind of done, which is to say the world is going up in flames, so don't bother with it, right?
Mm.
I'm saying the world has a future. This world will be raised up, and therefore let's take care of it. But let's also realize it's not all in our hands, and we don't just have 12 years left, or the world will burn.
Mm.
So yeah. So what is our place in nature? One thing else I was going to say is, it's interesting that if you think everything is nature, including us, there's no super nature, there's no God, and there's nothing special really about humanity above us. It can lead to a very Nietzschean sense of, okay, the laws of nature are there. Well, let's just obey the laws of nature, right? Let's really honor the environment, and let's consider humanity to be a plague, and let's just use the laws of nature that have formed us. And the Christchurch shooter was an eco-fascist, right? An eco-fascist, and people kind of think, what are ecological concerns and fascism have to do with one another? And actually, historically, there has been a link between certainly just one branch of ecological concern that just says nature is red in tooth and claw. We are nature. Therefore, we are going to pursue, life on those terms. And that's just another chilling kind of nihilistic vision of life. And it again makes us think we need to have this triple-decker understanding of life, where there's God, there's humanity, and there's nature. And, go back to Genesis 2, for instance, God puts man in a garden, not in the wild, but in a garden to steward and tend it. And then, what's the first job that Adam has in Genesis 2?
To name the animals?
Yeah, right. Taxonomy, which is literally what this natural history GCSE is going to be. It's basically going to be, can you name beech trees and oak trees, and can you identify this bird from that bird, and that kind of thing. It is kind of getting back to nature. It is kind of getting back to Genesis. But I think unless we deal with who is humanity in the mix, we're not going to be very good environmentalists. And then one last thing to say on all this is that Christians have not gotten this right. Certainly not uniformly. There have been many ways that Christians have got this wrong. I think one way Christians have got this wrong is we've considered nature to be like a machine, and this sort of 17th century drive, burst out of the scientific revolution, sees all of nature as just like machinery and cogs kind of grinding together. That's not a very Genesis 1-3 kind of view. And one of the things it meant was that sometimes we've looked at the animals as though animals are just machines. And if animals are just machines, then how will you farm them? You'll think of them as machinery to be exploited. And so I think Christians have gotten that wrong, because they've gotten kind of this Genesis language wrong. And I think Christians have looked at the dominion language, and they've thought of it in terms of dominate language, and we've got this wrong. And sometimes our environmentalist friends need to remind us of what true dominion really looks like. That can be helpful. It's just we don't really need the apocalyptic language attached to it, I would suggest. Lots of great stuff in the chat. Hello, Christoph Keating. Hello, Ian McCarthy. The birth rate is sinking. The islands are sinking. Yeah, wow. Paige Wright. Interesting. She says, I had the misfortune of watching the Russell Crowe version of Noah, and the whole premise was that humans were the plague over and against the environment, much like what you're talking about. Yeah, and we've spoken about Gnosticism quite a few times on the program. Gnosticism is to say that the world is bad, and the creator of this world is bad, actually. Jesus needs to save us out of this world up into some kind of spiritual reality. And so, yeah, sorry, the Noah film that Russell Crowe was in. Trying to remember the director. Who was the director who did Aronofsky? Darren Aronofsky.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Misfortune is definitely the right word in terms of viewing that film.
I liked Ray Winston in it. He was Ray Winston starred as Ray Winston. Hello, my lovelies. Yeah. Leave it. It's a wind up. But Darren Aronofsky was very much influenced by the Gnostic myths, the Gnostic retellings of the Noah story, in which the world is bad. That's interesting. Brandon John Kemeny has asked, if this world has a continuity in renewal, does that mean that I could literally plant a tree in this life and eat its fruit in my resurrected body? Does it matter at that level of detail? Because there is that famous quote, Luther was asked, what would you do if you knew that Jesus was coming back tomorrow? And he said, I'd plant a tree today. That's been the source of much debate. Like, what did Luther mean? Yeah, could he have, if Christ comes tomorrow and I plant a tree today, can I eat from that fruit next week or whatever? Interestingly, I think 1 Corinthians 15 says that the continuity between now and then is like a seed and the tree.
Yep.
So Paul's constantly saying, we are like acorns. One day we will be oaks, which is to say there's massive transformation between this world and the renewal that Christ brings. But there's also massive continuity. When you plant the acorn down into the ground and then the oak tree, sprouts up, you don't say, where's the acorn gone? Has somebody chucked the acorn away? Where's it gone? Yeah, it has become that. In the same way, Christ's body is both like, Christ's resurrection body is both like and unlike the body before Easter Sunday. It's unlike it in that, like, people, is that Jesus? I think, Peter, when he sees Jesus on the shore as he's fishing, he's like, is that? And John says, I think it's the Lord. It is the Lord. So he's a little bit unlike his pre-resurrection body. But obviously there's massive continuity as well. Check out my side. Check out my wounds. There's massive continuity between those things. So I'm going to say, I don't know, what would you say, Paul? I'm going to say yes. How about that? I'm going to say yes. You can plant an apple tree in this life, and it could be raised up, and you would eat glorified apples from that tree in your glorified body. I'm going to speculate to that degree. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I think I could get on board with it. I think I could get on board with the idea that there might be, I don't know. I mean, yeah. I'm just thinking, like, why wouldn't those things continue, but renewed somehow, or I don't know.
I mean, the prophets constantly said, you will sit under your own fig tree and you will eat from your own fig tree. You'll drink from your own well. You'll sit under your own fig tree. You'll sit under your own fig tree. Do we have a scriptural answer from Brandon? What do you think? Goodness, I love that idea, he said. Doesn't mean it's true. But I love that you love it. That's good. But yeah, we are meant to sit under our own fig tree. Yeah. I mean, it's radical. And I think, with environmentalist friends, I think this could be a great way into the gospel. Like you really love the planet. God really loves the planet. God really has a future for it. And your desire to see the world properly stewarded is very godly, and it taps into a bigger story. But you need the bigger story. You need humanity to be above nature, and you need God to be above humanity, or else things go very, very wrong, actually. Chantal Pereira has said, I had made the suggestion that if naturalism is all that exists, everything humans are endowed to do still falls under natural. In a Mitchell Webb sketch, they say most animal extinctions are not natural but man-made. And I was like, wait, if we are simply animals, we don't have a higher responsibility. That's exactly right. Yeah. For environmentalism to get off the ground, we need to have a culpability for nature and a responsibility over nature. Okay, and the
Quite the
responsibility
assumption, isn't it?
yeah,
Mm.
and Genesis 2 gives us our responsibility over nature, and Genesis 3 gives us our culpability for nature. But you need that kind of thing, or else environmentalism doesn't get off the ground. Brandon says Isaiah's talk about beating blades into plowshares sounds like it's for the new creation. Surely we don't start our farms and fields all over again, right? Yeah, right. See, yeah, there's continuity, and I think that's good news for the environmental movement. Brilliant. In a minute, we're going to move on and talk about our reset video from last Friday, which again talks about the issue, it's not natural. As we spoke to Rachel Gilson about sex and sexuality. But before we do that, I'd just like to give a little plug for a webinar that we're doing here at Speak Life. We're doing the 321 course and over 4 sessions starting tomorrow evening. That's Tuesday the 17th of November. Over 4 sessions, we're going to have a look at Jesus' vision for God, the world, and yourself. Let's have a look at a little clip.
321 is a short course exploring the basics of the Christian faith. In 4 sessions, we'll look at Jesus' view of God, the world, and yourself. You don't need any prior Christian knowledge, just an open mind. We're running the course via Zoom at 8 p.m. on the 17th, 20th, 24th, and 27th of November. You can sign up at speaklife.org.uk. We'll see you there.
So do go to speaklife.org.uk/course and sign up. We've had about 50 people sign up so far, and we'd love to have more. So why don't you join us for this Tuesday and this Friday, and then next Tuesday and next Friday, and over 4 sessions. We will do that little evangelistic course, and you're very welcome if you're a Christian. But why don't you invite a friend or 6 to come and join us? We'd love to have your company. We're holding it just on Zoom, so you will need to sign up, and we'll give you the login details there. But let's now think about Friday night, and I had the great privilege of speaking to Rachel Gilson, who's the author of Born Again This Way. And Paul, you've had a chance to look at the interview. What are your reflections on Rachel Gilson and the wisdom that she brings to this subject of sex and sexuality?
Yeah, I mean, just another really good interview with, just like you say, lots of wisdom, just really rich stuff in there. And I think, as I watched it, again, it's the kind of thing that I hope as Christian, I think if you're a Christian watching it, there's lots of good, encouraging stuff in there that will help you deal with difficult questions or kind of objections. But I think as well, it's the kind of thing I'd be quite comfortable sharing with a non-Christian who maybe has questions about things. And I would say, look, why don't you watch this? Because I think there's some really helpful discussion on there about the Christian view on sex and marriage, sexuality. And I mean, also, I think also, given the day and age we're living in, someone like Rachel Gilson has a credibility in a sense to talk about these things because of her past and her own kind of sexuality and what that is kind of the experience she's had with that in her life. I'm not a big fan of the modern day mentality of you can only speak about these things if you've had X, Y, and Z experience where you are this thing. I think it's entirely wrong. But I suspect that there would be people who would object to the modern, would object to the Christian view of sex and marriage and things, who would very much be in that ballpark. And yes. So someone like Rachel has a kind of easier way in perhaps than people like you and me who are stale, male and pale.
Yes, it just testifies to your Crowborough privilege that you don't see that you are situated in Crowborough and therefore speak as a Crowboroughian. What are you even called in Crowborough?
Crowbright, I think.
Crowbright. No, Crowborgian. Yes. Crowborgian from now on. And so you've selected a couple of clips for us to look at from Rachel's interview. What's the first clip? Set it up for us.
Well, we could have watched half the interview, to be honest. One of the things,
yeah.
There's this other guy who kept coming on. Just I think the first clip we're looking at, you raised the question with her, or you raised the objection that other people raise, is that Jesus never actually talks about homosexuality or sex and things like that. So why are Christians so caught up in it? And you get into a bit of a discussion about Matthew 19 and things there. So actually, we'll have a look and see what Rachel says about that.
Brilliant. Let's have a look at the first clip.
One thing that people often say is, Jesus never mentions anything about sexuality, so why should we?
Right.
And I always point them to, well, actually, no, he does in Matthew 19. And what
Yeah,
does he
Matthew
do?
19 is the big text.
Right. And what does he do? He takes us back to Genesis.
Yeah.
In which, I guess, from Genesis, what Jesus is drawing out is from the beginning, he made them male and female. So he's bringing that out of Genesis chapter 1.
Which he did not have to do because the question was about divorce and his entire audience knew that marriage was male-female.
Right.
So going out of his way to say it.
Right. What do you take from that?
Well, I find it very useful for 2020, so thank you, Jesus.
Yes, right.
But I also think it emphasizes the beauty and purpose that we're male and female. And we see this a lot when we're dealing with Jesus, how he dignifies and honors women, which is something that you should come to Genesis and take away with both hands, but that many cultures around the world have struggled with the full equality of male and female. So right. I even see that as part of the beauty there.
So there's a beauty about male and female together, and on page 1 of the Bible, male and female are described as together in the image of God, which is an extraordinary kind of statement to have on page 1 of your founding text. And then Jesus says, quoting from Genesis chapter 2, and for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother, be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. What do you take from these verses?
I think it's lovely to link the two because they're not, there's a whole bunch of verses separating Genesis 1:28 from Genesis 2:24. We've got a lot of different things going on, but part of what's going on in marriage is part of what's going on with male and female, right? Like, because male and female is a non-negotiable when it comes to biblical marriage. So I think it's really helpful that it's there. But another non-negotiable is faithfulness. And sometimes, which I think is represented in the Genesis 2:24 text, that
cleaving,
foreverness, because sometimes in our pearl clutching in the church about what gay marriage means, we can speak as if gay marriage is the only threat to marriage. But actually, straight people do a great job of sabotaging marriage all on their own, all the time. A marriage that is not male and female is not a biblical marriage. But a marriage that is unfaithful or that doesn't promote the other goods that we see of marriage in the scripture is also not a faithful marriage. And so Jesus is really calling us, all of us, to a very high vision.
So there we got Matthew chapter 19, which I think is fascinating because so often people say, Jesus never spoke about sexuality, so why should we? Well, actually, the one thing Jesus did say about sex and sexuality, well, back in the Sermon on the Mount, he talked about lust. But in terms of sex and marriage, Jesus does speak about sex and marriage. And what does he do? He takes us back to Genesis chapters 1 and 2. And what do we learn there, Paul?
Well, I mean, I think, what Rachel draws out at the beginning there is that Jesus talks about male and female. And actually, in one sense, it's a strange thing to say because his audience wouldn't even have needed that spelled out. You wouldn't have thought, that marriage is between a man and a woman. Actually, I think she says in that one, doesn't she? I'm very glad. Actually, in 2020, I'm very glad that he says that. But I mean, it just goes to show that I think there. She uses the phrase "it's non-negotiable," doesn't she? That male and female, and actually there is later on in the about if you watch the interview, if you want to watch it, and she does talk about around the 41 minute mark. She does talk more about this idea of male and female not being negotiable. But it shows us, Jesus does talk about this issue, and he draws us right back to Genesis, and he's unequivocal, that marriage is between a man and a woman, and it's not even like you say, even the fact he says that, it should have been a given for those people,
right?
But yet he still draws that out, and so there is still that message there. I think it does speak to us as well. Obviously, we're living in a very different age, but I think lots of good stuff.
Yeah. It's between a man and a woman, and it's for life. I mean, that was the thing that he was really being asked about. He was being asked about divorce. And Jesus comes over a lot more strict than many of the rabbis of his day, that says, you can get divorced for any and every reason. And Jesus says, no, what God has joined together, let no one separate. And so he speaks of something there that's not particularly natural. In that sense, is that I think Christians can get into trouble, can't they? When we talk in areas of sexuality and we start talking about what is it that's natural. Oh, well, obviously it's natural for man and woman to get together because that's what biology teaches us. And let's just go with biology on the matter. Whereas I don't think Jesus is quite saying that what's natural is just what comes naturally to us. Because what comes naturally to us is not lifelong monogamy.
You got to think these guys were conservative Jews, and they're hearing this idea of lifelong matrimony and kind of going, hold on a second, this is not a bunch of liberal woke, people who are kind of rallying against the idea of marriage, but they do want to rally against the idea of it being with one woman for their whole life.
Yes.
Which is why, it's when people say, don't they, you do hear people say things like the Bible's view on sexuality and marriage and things is very old fashioned, it's very of its time. And you go, well, it's not at all of its time, it's old in the sense that it's 2,000 years old, but I mean it was radical in the sense of what was being told even to these conservative Jews, let alone, incredibly liberal kind of Greek and Roman society. So
yes. It's always struck everybody as unnatural.
It's never been the norm.
Yeah. So even like Old Testament, the Old Testament Jews were living in a society which, the Egyptians were around them, the Assyrians were around them. They had visions of sex and sexuality that were wildly different from what the Old Testament law said. And the New Testament church was living in the Greco-Roman context, in which their vision of sex and sexuality was wildly different. And Jesus, even in the context of conservative Jews, was like, oh no, this thing's for life, by the way. And people are like, that's unnatural, including Peter. He's like, well, that's unnatural. It's unrealistic. Who could live under this horrible regime? Which again, makes me think like our message is not just that. It shouldn't be just a natural law argument, because what Jesus is proclaiming here feels unnatural to everybody. It doesn't just feel unnatural to someone who might have lesbian or gay feelings, right, or orientation. It's not. It doesn't just feel unnatural to people in the LGBT plus community. It feels unnatural to heterosexual fisherman Peter, who's just like, I'm out of here. If that's what marriage is, like, forget about it. So what is natural? Sure, the Christian vision of one man, one woman for life is something that has actually built our civilization, and you can see all sorts of beautiful benefits to it. But the more I think about it, the more I think I don't think our argument should be a natural law argument, because lifelong matrimony, like, is a novelty, really. Like in the world, no one else thinks of lifelong matrimony apart from Jesus and those who follow him.
Yeah. So whether you are someone who is heterosexual or homosexual, this view just completely narrows you down as to how you should exercise your sexuality, doesn't it?
Yeah. And it builds nature. It doesn't. It's interesting that Rachel's book is called Born Again This Way, because she's riffing off of Lady Gaga's "Born This Way," which is, of course, a major rallying cry for many members of the LGBT community, that I am born this way. Although, obviously, the existence of the T together with the LGB means that there's actually a massive tension there. Some people saying, I'm born this way. Some people saying, I was just assigned that at birth, and who I really am is who I choose to be, right? So there's a massive tension within the LGBT community on this very issue. But traditionally, the rallying cry has been, I'm born this way. I am naturally of this sexual orientation. And what Rachel is saying is, well, can we rethink that? Or is there something above nature? Can I be born again in a certain way? Or must I always be living according to my natural desires? And I think that points us again to the fact that there is something above nature that's called us, and there's something above us that's called God, that is an extra factor in all these conversations. And I'm not just a slave to nature. I can be born again. And once I accept that, I can start to live above my natural desires and discipline my natural desires and tame my natural desires. Because if I submitted to my natural desires today, I'd be in jail before the day was over, right? I need to tame my natural desires, or we don't get to have a civilization. Like, unless I can say no to nature and build something on top of it with the help of God, then we don't have a civilization anymore. Everything is libido, right? So again, that's making me think, and I think it should make us think in much more sophisticated ways about what nature really is and how we react to it. What's the other clip that you've got for us, Paul?
Yeah, the other clip actually follows on directly from where we just left off, and it's just a very brief conversation just to do with how both singleness and marriage actually have a good place and are good things.
Let's have a look.
Jesus is really calling us, all of us, to a very high vision of what marriage is, which is why, of course, his disciples immediately say, if that is what marriage is, we're not so sure whether it's intelligent to get involved. And he affirms them by saying, giving that saying about the eunuchs, right? Like, actually, you're right. And it's both perfectly honorable, possible, and dignified to serve the kingdom of heaven in an unmarried way. So I think
I would say he even goes so far as to prefer it.
If you're really gonna
do.
And especially if you compare it to 1 Corinthians 7, I mean, honestly, singleness does look like the varsity option. Yeah. And marriage looks like the JV team. So I really appreciate the honesty and the realism of Jesus. He has an idealism, a clarity about the high goal of both of the vocations of singleness and marriage. But there's also a realistic, like honestly, if you can't, if you don't think you can do marriage, like singleness is a good option for you.
So she's very good at saying, look, like there is this grand romance that is preached by the Bible. Heaven marries earth, Christ marries his bride, and the end of all things is heaven, consummation, coming to earth, and we're fruitful and we multiply, and there's all that kind of grand romance going on in the Bible. But because of that grand romance almost, let's not prioritize human marriage. There's that place for singleness. That comes across really strongly for her, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And I think she's, I think helpfully, she's spelling out particularly that, well, she said right at the end there, singleness is a good option. I think it's helpful that she says that in the Christian context, because we very much fall into the trap in the Christian church of pointing to marriage as being this kind of picture of the relationship between Christ and his people, and therefore singleness can sometimes get put on the back burner or seen as a slightly lower thing, even though we know Paul talks about, the good place of singleness and how actually it might be better to be single. But of course, it's not just in the church that we fall into that trap. Even in society, our society is quite anti singleness in some ways, isn't it? If people talk about, being single and ready to mingle, the idea is that, you're single, but you're looking to get back out there and find someone. And I can't remember the last time I saw a film where the happy ending is this person is all by themselves at the end and they're not in a relationship. That's not how we perceive the happy ending, is it? But actually, we need to, in some sense, as Christians within the church, but also in society, we want to reclaim the idea that singleness is a good thing too.
Yeah. Although, like with Marriage Story, for instance, on Netflix, they kind of, it all falls apart. And what is it? LA Story? No, that's the Steve Martin old one. What's the one with Ryan Gosling? In it.
What the film?
La La Land. Yeah. La La Land. That kind of, it's kind of, it's a little bit, let's not commit too much.
Well, I mean, because there's the other film, the film, and I very rarely come away from any film feeling like, oh, it's so bad. I want nothing to do with this. But the one film was actually, I Give It a Year. I don't know if you remember that.
Right? Yeah, dreadful.
And I came away and I said to Becca, I hated it. I said because there were this couple that are married, and then there's this other person, and the guy quite likes her, and basically the answer at the end of it was, well, don't worry about being faithful in your marriage anymore. Just dump your marriage and go and be with the other person. I mean, it was still about going and being with someone else, but it was just this kind of such a low view of the marriage relationship. You think even, I don't know, maybe even 10 years ago, surely the happy ending is someone deciding, getting there, rekindling the marriage or whatever,
right.
But not in this day and age.
I would The Devil Wears Prada was a bit of a turning point for me. I think again that was sort of an ending in which the relationship kind of there wasn't the fairy tale ending, and that was the first time I really sort of my ears pricked up and started to notice that our romances are not ending with the happily ever after anymore. And La La Land, and I Give It a Year, and what's the one with Steve Carell in it? Not 40-Year Virgin.
I was going to say 40-Year-Old Virgin.
No, not that one. There've been a number of kind of stories that I think even 15 years ago, 10 years ago, they would have ended with a happily ever after, but actually people's inability to forgive one another has just meant that the gears just grind against each other, and it ends up in tragedy, or it at least ends up with they don't come together in the end. Atonement, I don't want to spoil any endings for people, but again, when you look at Atonement and you look at La La Land and you look at Marriage Story, you've got a lot of examples of love stories that look like they're heading towards the happily ever after, and they refuse to submit to the happily ever after. And I wonder if that's partly because as a society we don't believe in the happily ever after, and we therefore think it's far more realistic. It's true to life. It's gritty to have people kind of not together in the end. And yet, the Apostle Paul reads Genesis 2, the man and his wife were naked and they felt no shame. And for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother, be joined to his wife. The two will become one flesh. And Paul says, I'm saying this refers to Christ and the church. And Revelation finishes with the great marriage of heaven and earth. There is really genuinely a happily ever after. And therefore we can believe in that happily ever after. Therefore we can be environmentalists in the end of all things. And we can deprioritize the fulfillment of our sexual desires now in order to testify to the coming marriage. And if I'm single, I discipline my sexual desires in a certain way and testify to the great marriage in my singleness. And if I'm married, I discipline my desires in a different way. But again, that's not the ultimate. The ultimate is above and the ultimate is coming.
And Rachel draws out the really useful thing, doesn't she, about that you have to have a belief in being raised. Just like John Baer did in your interview with him, you can't live the life of death if you don't think you'll be raised at the end, because who would choose death if it's just death, if there's no life? And she talks, Rachel, in the video, doesn't she, about if you just say no to all your desires, whether you're heterosexual or homosexual, whatever your sexuality kind of is, without the idea that there is this new life, all you're choosing is death. So, you have to have this idea. The only way any of us can choose to live the way Jesus wants us to in regards to our sexuality can only be if we really believe that this isn't all there is. Because if this is all there is, then, go sow your wild oats and fill your boots, because this is the only chance you got. Get on it. But, if we're going to choose this way, which is to choose the life of self-denial and in the shape of the cross, well, you can't really do that if you don't think that there's a resurrection.
Yeah. Right. And let's just finish on this note that also all of us fall short of this every day. But the good news is that the heavenly romance is the ultimate romance, and my inability to approximate the heavenly romance is forgiven by the true heavenly romance. And so I come into the real marriage with Christ, and I say to him, with all my debts, all that I am I give to you, all that I have I share with you. And Christ absorbs all those debts, and he says, and all that I am I give to you, and all that I have I share with you. And it's really that forgiveness that empowers us to be able to pick ourselves back up again and model the great romance day by day. Christophe Keating has said something in Top Chat that I had no idea. The French title of the film, I Give It a Year, is Mariage à l'Anglaise, which is my best French accent. Stop it. Which is, when translated out of the French, English-style marriage. So I Give It a Year is English-style marriage. How dare they? Wow. How very dare they? That's yeah.
Why do you care? You're not English.
I don't, but the French.
Yeah, how dare the French say these things?
We all know what the French are like.
It's like, quick cut, go to VT, go to adverts quickly. Glen's off on one. Like, ranting about the French again.
Don't get me started on the Dutch. Rory Martin, our Dutch intern, is now livid with me, but I'll deal with him afterwards. Never mind. Yeah, guys, thank you so much for joining us on the livecast. And Paul, do you want to let people know how they can experience the goodness of Speak Life all through the week?
Yes, they could experience the goodness. Yes, so obviously if you're watching us on YouTube, give us a subscribe here. That would be great. But of course, we're on all the major social media platforms, so Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And you can find us by searching for Speak Life UK. And then, of course, you can always head to the website, speaklife.org.uk. And if you put a / sign up at the end of that, you can sign up to our email, which kind of rounds up all the resources we put out in the kind of week that has preceded.
Brilliant. And Christophe Keating on Top Chat has just said, great pronunciation. Huh? Mariage à l'anglaise. Le mot juste. Brilliant. I feel vindicated.
I'm just glad you haven't quite got to the point yet of like putting on like a beret or something. You've headed down the old road of, here we are.
Oh, yeah.
Mariage à l'anglaise. Like.
Very good. Mariage l'anglaise, because it's feminine, not masculine, Paul.
All right, I've never done any French.
You wouldn't. Have you? Never.
Don't talk to me about masculine. Have you not seen this thing on my face?
Le mouche. Or is it la mouche? I don't know. Thank you so much for joining us on the livecast, and we'll see you tomorrow night for the 321 webinar. Go to speaklife.org.uk/courses and join us tomorrow night. But if you don't join us, then we'll see you next week. God bless.
Good to see you.